beef stroganoff. Finally, I've gotten a lot of requests for this, and since I had this amazing homemade creme fraiche sitting around, hopefully you saw that video, I decided I needed to make some beef stroganoff, and I did, and it was pretty amazing. Alright, so you're going to need 2 pounds of beef chuck. Talk to your butcher. They are very nice. I told him I was making beef stroganoff, and I asked if I could have a piece that came from a single muscle or as close to it as possible. That way you don't get any weird like pieces of membrane going through or big sections of fat. Alright, so I'm going to take my piece of beef chuck. I'm going to cut it in like, I don't know, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick steaks. And then just cut it in like 1/2 inch width pieces. I think the French term for that cut is baton, but I call it little strips of beef. Your personal exact shape and size doesn't really matter as long as they're consistent. Once those are cut, salt and pepper generously on your cutting board. We're going to go over to the stove where I have my large stainless steel pan on high heat. All right, you want to use a large, good pan for this. I'm going to put in some vegetable oil. As soon as it starts to shimmer and almost smoke, I'm going to throw in my meat. Now, you always hear on TV, don't crowd the pan. You know what? For this cut of meat, for this recipe, you can crowd the pan. What happens when you crowd the pan, as you can see, is before it all browns nicely, the water's released and it starts to sort of simmer in its own juices. This would be terrible for certain cuts of meat. But because we're using chuck, and this is going to simmer for a long time and get tender, it's okay. What you're going to do is you're going to keep it on high, the liquid's going to come out, it's going to boil off, and then the meat's going to brown in its own juices. It's a beautiful thing. All right, look at that. Perfect. All right, once the meat is nicely browned, we're going to pull it off onto a plate to reserve, turn the heat down to medium, throw in a chunk of butter. All right, don't wipe out the pan. I want all those beautiful brown bits. I'm going to toss in some thickly sliced mushrooms and 1/2 of onion that I just roughly sliced. We're going to give that a nice big pinch of salt. I'm going to saute that in the butter on medium heat until nicely browned. And one thing that happens when we do this kind of technique, the mushrooms also give off some liquid along with the onions, which kind of deglazes the pan a little bit, and those mushrooms start to absorb all that beautiful flavor from the beef drippings. Once that's all nicely browned, I'm going to add a couple cloves of garlic, just give it a swirl for about 30 seconds. I'm going to throw in a tablespoon of flour. I'm going to stir that in and cook that for another minute or two. And then our liquids. I'm going to go with some dry white wine. Pretty much anything will work, anything drinkable. Some beef or veal stock. And I'm just going to let that come up to a simmer. Again, we're still on medium heat. It's going to thicken up a little bit. I'm going to scrape and make sure I got all that beautiful goodness off the bottom of the pan. I'm going to add my beef back in. A little more beef or veal stock. All the measurements will be on Food Wishes, of course. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that's all mixed together nice and evenly. I'm going to bring it up till it's just barely simmering. See that? Just a little bit of a bubble. All right, low heat. I'm going to cover it, and we're going to just let this braise for about an hour. Maybe every, 20 minutes, give it a stir. Now, depending on your beef and how you cut it, this is going to take a little more or a little less time. So you're going to have to play it by ear. But I'm going to guess at about an hour you should be getting close. So if your meat is still not as tender as you want, add another splash of water or stock. Let it simmer a little longer. But once you decide your meat is pretty much ready, the last step is stirring in a big, beautiful, gigantic dollop of homemade creme fraiche. You can use sour cream, but it's not as good. Sour cream can curdle and separate when it gets hot, so really, I want you to make your own creme fraiche. Watch the video. It was so easy and amazing. Now, of course, anytime we do dishes like this, it's up to you to adjust. Do you want it saucier? Then you should use a little more beef stock and creme fraiche. If you want it drier, don't put as much. Up to you. Okay, once the creme fraiche and or sour cream is mixed in, I'm going to stir in some freshly chopped chives. I'm going to taste for salt and pepper, and we're done. I highly recommend it gets served over beautifully buttered noodles. I like those big, fat, wide egg noodles. So delicious. All right, time to taste this amazing Russian recipe. Also, you don't have to, but I like to be putting a little more sour cream on top. Then I'm going to be putting the fork in to taste it. And yes, I agree, one Putin joke would have been plenty. This is just one of my favorite beef recipes of all time. And I'm 25% Russian, so I think it's in my blood to be able to make this pretty good. Is that racist? Probably. Let me taste. Oh my God. So amazing. So anyway, head on over to, as always, enjoy.